Hello and welcome back to another story smithing episode here with John Gulick. I'm very excited for this one because, as usual, the thought kind of came this morning, and it's something I'm really interested in exploring further today. Um, where we're at, just to position us a little bit for this episode, is the last few months I've been working on an outline for my next novel, The Jester's Son. It takes place in the same world that Hazeltop, the previous novel, took place in, but it's in a different continent and a different group of people that is kind of adjacent to the main cast of characters in Hazeltop. The thought I had this morning was in, I guess, the vein of developing that continent adjacent to the main storyline of Hazeltop. A great way to do that would be to actually do some more brainstorming or actually some writing involving some adventures, some places in that continent. So far, my outline is very large. It's about 30,000 words roughly for this new novel, which is about half as long as Hazeltop was. So this is by far the largest outline I've ever written, and I think there's enough kind of material that it's sounding very interesting to see if there's any other ways I can approach kind of the large data set I've already got, all the fun little details and world building elements that are already in the Barony, which is the name of this other continent we're going to be kind of exploring today. And specifically, kind of the thought I had this morning that I'm interested in exploring is rather than starting the story of the Barony where I had it, where I've kind of outlined it over the last few months with a jester in a particular city, something that sounds very interesting is actually going from an explorer's perspective. So this is something, the reason this thought came to me originally, I think, was because I don't know, or I haven't read of any stories that really explore the theme of exploration in as direct a way as I'm sort of imagining here. Where characters are actually discovering a new land, and it's some blend of exploration and the really powerful, really effective kind of uh, partnership, companionship, fellowship that you get on a large journey like that. So I guess in other words, the theme of exploration in the story would be a different frame than something like, going to Mordor to destroy a ring, or any number of the kind of standard quests to go out and destroy, take out the big bad guy, save a certain city, whatever. If you put a little bit of a different flavor on that, so instead of, like I said, those other options, this party is just exploring. They're looking at in this new area. Nobody's ever been there, no idea what to expect. And kind of the secondary piece of why I think this idea is appealing to me is because this is going to give me, as a writer, a great practice in pantsing, which is kind of the term you might hear for a writer that has not outlined a lot and is just writing into the story and kind of sees what they get. I obviously did not do this for The Jester's Son, seeing as I've got about 160 pages printed off here of outlined content. That is the opposite of pantsing, which would be kind of an architect. I've really architected that story, and I know a lot of the ins and outs, most of them. And I think for me, the process of having outlined it is a decent chunk of the kind of creative work that it would take to write it. So to go ahead and drop 400 or 500 hours into writing it right now, definitely a lot of learning and advantage in that, but a lot of the progress I've gained as a writer through the outline, it was in the outline and not necessarily in the writing. So all that's to say, I think I'm interested in just looking at another idea for this continent and seeing if there's a way I can practice some of those kind of pantsing, character building, organic story skills rather than just going with what I've got in the outline. So we'll see where we get in the next couple of hours. It may be a fun idea that stays an idea. It may be the start of a little short story collection. It may be, who knows, another novel. That ought to keep me out of trouble for a while. So, what I'm what I'm wondering today, like I said, we're looking at exploration. I'm wondering what the best uh, sort of combination of ingredients is in this story. And all I really want to do is identify that starting point and maybe a couple plot beats, just a few over the course of this story, whether that's a short story or something a lot larger like a novel. Because I do really think there's some great opportunity for me as a writer to just be writing what's happening in the present scene and then organically kind of evolving the story as they move to different areas of this continent, they discover new things. Maybe there's groups of locals that they meet. And since they are actually discovering these things for the first time, it is a kind of a unique way to lean into that flexibility as the writer, because you don't really know what's coming up and you have to react and you have to blend and create some cohesion, and build on the arcs that are there in scene one. So let's see what we get with that. I do have a kind of a little sketch I made of the continent. So where we get to in the Jester's Son, potentially 100 years, couple hundred years after what we're going to be imagining today, is a nation called the Barony. And it's split into, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 little fiefs. And each kind of has an area of interest. There's one that's focused on culture, another on war, another on gold, farming, knowledge, religion, and sort of manufacturing. Those are the different areas. And it creates this, I guess what I've found in The Jester's Son in outlining it is that sort of everyday or work-focused segregation of fiefs is really interesting, and it creates a lot of friction between them because their day-to-day life and their goals are very different depending on if they're valuing music and culture and conversation versus efficiency in manufacturing and quality of materials, quality of products, all these things. So that's been a really interesting dynamic to play with. And what I'm hoping is in the story we're doing today, we can plant some seeds of how the barony would evolve to the picture that we will see in The Jester's Son. Okay, so big question today. What I'm curious and what I want to explore here, I've got my blank Google Doc open, so that's always a dangerous start. What I want to explore today is what's the best starting picture to create the most possibilities, the most opportunity for variations and flexibility, as some cast of characters moves through an unexplored, dangerous, probably magical continent. So a couple ideas off the bat. I think the military academy genre is extremely popular right now, and for good reason. I mean, you look at things like Red Rising, Name of the Wind, a lot of the kind of top 10 books of the last few years have fit somewhere into the military academy theme genre. And, you can see why there's a lot of tension built into that sort of a structure to a story. So I think one option would be taking some elements from that. So what I would imagine from that is there may be some structuring of apprentices and masters that are embarking on this journey together, and somehow the apprentices are being graded or assessed on their effectiveness in this quest. It's sort of like their graduation test or whatever. I could see that having some merit. And I guess I should say, what would make the most sense would just be get a cast of 20, 30, 40-year-old elite explorers, warriors, mages, whatever, on this and let them go ham wild. But I'm really interested in having a younger cast. One, because that's kind of the reader I would like to write this for potentially. If I ever get to a point where I'm writing this as a novel or whatever, I'd like to write it for somebody, maybe around the 15-year-old mark. And that kind of means you need a younger cast. The other reason is that helps flush the theme or the I don't know, content and the readership, because I don't want to be going into anything too gritty. If the cast is all 20, 30, 40 year olds, I definitely want to keep the theme on exploration and curiosity and those sorts of things. So I think having a younger cast here, younger characters, is good. We just need to find a way to make that work. So that's one of the reasons the military kind of academy came to mind. So that's one option. Others, what else could we do? I'm not trying to paint myself into a corner here with anything. I want to find something interesting because, like I said earlier, I really haven't read a great fantasy, young adult fantasy exploration novel. And it sounds fun to break that ground. So, military academy, we could do some kind of shipwrecked group. So I'm imagining, I've got other continents in this world. I'm imagining some travelers from one of those places. They're out sailing. There's a shipwreck of some kind, and some batch of kids washes up on shore. We're kind of getting into like Lord of the Flies material here, which dissuades me a little bit, I think, maybe from falling into the classic, plane crash, arrive on the island trope. So probably going to be ignoring that one, I guess. So military academy, shipwrecked. How else could we get some explorers there? If we create a group of people that are inhabitants of this continent, we could give them some level of civilization, and then that would create kind of an interest from an existing country to go there and explore. So it could be sort of a diplomatic envoy that gets sent out. I do really want to have a diverse group of characters, though. Some warriors, maybe a cartographer, a mage, a cook. Really have a blend. And so for it to just be a diplomatic envoy, I think is going to be lacking a little bit. I do want to find something other than just sort of a standard military venture. And I do have the sense that later in the story, a great twist would be to bring out kind of native people. If the first third to half of a book was felt like a man versus wild type adventure, and then all of a sudden we bring in natives that have their own advanced culture, different language and things, but they would have the ability to really put a spin on the story. I think that's a nice twist to have in the back pocket. So the diplomatic envoy is probably not what I'm looking for. If we do go military academy, I want to put a nice spin on it so it feels effective and natural in this story. What else could we do here? A different option would be if we create... So if we rewind the clock on this world a little bit, and instead of, let's say, 300 years before the Jester's Son and Hazeltop, which both occur at roughly the same time, if we move it a little earlier, we could say that there are more uninhabited places in the world. And so this kind of adventuring, explorative mindset is more common. And we could say the main continent that Hazeltop exists on is just sending out, ships to explore, and there's all these rewards for finding things and for sort of cataloging different lands. That would let us get a cast on the shore pretty well. They could just be one of the groups that explore. They show up here, and then they've got sort of a built-in quest to explore it. That would also give us some potential to later in the story have another group of explorers show up. Imagine that this standing order has been out for like 10 years to just go out and explore, and if you discover a new land, you get a nice check or land or a little fief to yourself, whatever. And there's groups that have gone out, lots that have gone missing, whatever. Our group shows up in the barony, and they're exploring. They feel like, they're the first ones there. They're really trying to catalog and map this area. And then when they get deep into the continent, they're starting to discover some really amazing things. All of a sudden, they find this group, this other traveling group that has already been there for, 10 years and has established a compound or a kingdom of their own over sort of these native people because they've got a technological advantage. That's interesting. So, what I think I'm really leaning towards is some variation or nuance on the military academy theme. And looking back at the idea of the land being very open to exploration, I think that's something we can lean on here as material to kind of help with our framework of the first scene or standing order that these characters are operating under. And I think what we want to do here is establish, this home continent that Hazeltop is on is just going to be sending out lots and lots of adventurers. And I think a nice, realistic, believable framework that we could connect with that's going to allow us to get younger cast members into this story is this sort of smaller, more niche band of explorers. And I could see one kind of master for each trade being on the party, and then one apprentice who's almost like a backup. And the reason I think that would make sense logistically is, if the idea is, hey, let's send out 100 or 200 of these little ships, and we're trying to find as much land as we can, conquer as much land, spread, whatever. We want to send out as many eyes as we can, or as widely as we can through all these different ships. And that means we're not putting a bunch of our masters, a bunch of our best, warriors, captains, cartographers on the same boat. We really need to split them up. And we also need a backup in case something goes wrong on the voyage. If they get somewhere and it's dangerous as they are trying to establish shelter and explore and do all of that, we need a backup, and we don't want to be sending our elite people as backups. So let's have some kind of an apprentice system that we have a supply of semi-trained people that can fill these roles. So what I'm imagining is we've got our boat full of several masters, and each has an apprentice. And I do like that a lot. I don't know that it's terribly original, but I think combined with this exploration backdrop to the story, I think that could work really well. And I think, let's see, boy, this is the first episode I've done in a while where I've had to write and speak, and I'm remembering how difficult that is. So each master has an apprentice, and that's good. And I think one thing that's going to allow us to do is create sort of a high-low house system. I'm thinking of Downton Abbey here, where there's the servants in kind of the lower area and the royalty in the nice house. And what that allows, or what that could allow us to do here, is play off of two different storylines as we're going through the same plot events. So, potentially what that could be, the high house, or the higher ups, whatever, would obviously be the masters, and they're going to be very focused on things like prestige, wealth, glory, you name it. They're going to be focused on a lot more of these, I don't know, worldly, legacy based things. Whereas the low, this is going to be the apprentices. We're going to have a lot of, interpersonal conflict, like the masters, but the focus of that is less on, hey, you're the you're the knight, you're getting paid this to do that, but really there's nothing we're fighting, so why are you taking part of my share? This is crazy. Instead of that type of conversation, which maybe the masters are a little more focused on, apprentices are going to be more of the standard schoolyard frustrations, embarrassments, those sorts of things. I think having those kind of two genres of viewpoints can give us room to play in different ways. What I probably don't want to do is create two viewpoint characters, one in each area. I think it'll be more fun, especially if we're going for that younger readership, to just have one viewpoint character and have that person be one of the apprentices. Okay, so what types of masters and apprentices would we actually need on a trip like this? So let's call these the roles. So we'll need some kind of fighter, if we're assuming we're getting into places that potentially are hostile. So we'll need some kind of a warrior or knight. I do like the idea of a knight, I think, because as opposed to something like warrior, barbarian, mercenary. Knight, I think, has a better flavor because we're going to be going into wilderness and unknown, and what we would associate with a knight is like sophistication, manners, honor, things like that, which aren't necessarily found in the wilderness. So I think being able to play off of kind of the knight's code of honor out there could be good. So we'll have a knight. I'm partial to having a cook. I think the cook gets left out of a lot of stories, and you hear, the most important thing for an army is to have good cooks. So I think having a cook could be a really important role, and in fact, I think the cook's apprentice might be our viewpoint character. I'm interested in kind of seeing where we get, and if there's any other interesting options. I'm also making a game about, or I'm sort of brainstorming a video game about cook, so I think that's top of mind as well for me. Cartographer, I'm interested in the cartographer and people that make maps. My question here is whether that role constitutes its own position in this party, or if it makes sense if we can roll that in with something like a mage, a scholar, a woodsman, whatever. Because I think what's going to be really important here is we don't want 20 people in this group. We want to keep it as lean as possible, because it's going to be easier for the reader to keep track of, easier for us to juggle as the writer, and just leaner overall. So we've got a knight, a cook. We're going to want some kind of a woodsman for sure. We could call them a ranger. I kind of like just woodsman, yeoman. Yeah, let's go woodsman. We'll definitely need a captain because we're going to be sailing. That does bring up one thought I have, which is I'm not terribly excited to write a long voyage story. I don't want to write 3 months of these characters just being on the boat. I think that may be a good time to establish some, interpersonal relations. We can kind of set up each of the characters. If they're just have nothing to do on this boat but just talk, we can kind of go into some of the dynamics, but also it's not that interesting really. So when we get into plot, make a little header down here. We got to ask the question, how do we accelerate the boat ride? And it could be something as easy as actually just, giving a few lines that really inform the reader that we've, in the last 3 months, Davis was sunburnt, nearly frozen, nearly blinded by the sun, and at last sees the land. Something like that. We can toss on in the last X weeks or months, and then just sort of blend it into the scene as they arrive on the land. That's easy, but we want to get as much value out of the boat scene as we can. And I think, like I said earlier, I think there's a lot of ways we can draw out some character in those scenes, while hopefully not making them boring. So back to our roles, we've got a knight, a cook, a woodsman, a captain. I do want some kind of magic, so we want kind of the party leader, I think, to be, well, I guess this is the question. Do we want the party leader to be the standard, wizard or whatever? Very tempting. Falls into a lot of the kind of standard tropes. I'm trying to connect a couple ideas here between the books, which, if obviously you haven't really seen The Jester's Son, so that is a big question mark. But in that culture, in the barony, within the time frame of The Jester's Son, magic is completely despised, and there's a couple reasons for that. But I'm wondering if one of the reasons that we could sort of build in is if we did make a wizard or somebody the leader here, and they failed in some big way in guiding the group, and maybe almost led to the downfall or whatever, that could be another reason that 300 years down the line informs why this continent really does not like magic at all. So I'm wondering that. I'm also trying to think of stories where there is a magical leader over a small group and they do fail. Gandalf doesn't really fail. I mean, he kind of dies, but then he gets brought back, so better than ever. Dumbledore. I did just read The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, I believe is his last name, which is very good. Has a magical leader in one of the plot lines who I guess you could pretty well say fails from time to time. But anyway, we want magic in here somehow. I guess maybe the better question is there a way we can have magic without it being the leader? Because it seems pretty hard to not have an all-wise or a very wise, super powerful wizard as your party leader. I'll put a wizard in. Maybe the only way I could see it is if the kingdom that these adventures were coming from was really kind of conceited and self-important, and is sending some kind of a diplomatic envoy or a royal whatever to guide the party. That character would probably be pretty abrasive, I imagine. And they would kind of have like the not word of mouth, but the spoken command over the group, while everybody actually knows, the wizard or the knight, whoever, actually is leading here. So do we want an envoy diplomat? I suppose we probably do, because I guess the thought would be, we're sending out all these adventurers. If we encounter a land that is inhabited, we probably don't want to just try to put them to the sword and create a war. We want to try to establish some relations with them. And so each of these groups that goes out would have a diplomat of some kind. Okay, so I'm going to put the diplomat in. So far we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We are at 6 adventurers. I would not be opposed to a 7th. Like I said earlier, there's 7 fiefs in the barony once that's kind of established. And so it might be nice to have a bit of symmetry between the roles and the later fiefs, because I think there could be sort of some seeds we could plant that say, this original group of 7 sort of establishes a lot in their wake, and we've got a lot of fiefs that kind of correlate to these people. The knight would go with the combat fief. The cook would go with Taperton, the sort of farming slash homely thief. The wizard would probably be in Masis, the religion fief, and so on. So I guess what fief do we not have represented here? There's a fief for kind of gold and trade. That could be the diplomat. Probably learning or religion would be the missing one. So the wizard would maybe be more learning, I suppose. So then we would be missing kind of the religion fief, if we want to include somebody from that role as well. So that's interesting, because the religion I invented for the barony is unique to the barony. So, and I don't really have an origin for it. It's not as though, it's the same religion that is practiced in Hazeltop, which there's not really an explicit religion that I described in the book there. So yeah, the question would be like, where does this religion come from? And maybe what I'd like to do, I guess, is with the 7th character, give a starting point to that religion. Like, is there a type of character or job that would lend itself to that? Okay, so what does the religion look like in the barony? Maybe that'll help us work backwards. It is a worship of the master. And this is a good question for me, because the religion is really adjacent to the events of the Jester Son, and I don't have a lot of depth to this religion, to be honest. There's sort of like hermit, priestly type people that observe and try to kind of spread the word of this religion. But in terms of its beliefs, that's tricky. I should probably have more information on that. Some lemonade might help clear this up. Okay, so who would see themselves as the master and potentially put behind them a religion of some kind? The diplomat could certainly do that. The wizard, if we created them to be power hungry. There's not really any roles we're missing, are there? I definitely don't want to add something that we don't need. This is tricky. These big questions at the start of a project. Knight, cook, woodsman, captain, wizard, diplomat. Well, I guess I'm seeing a lot of overlap between woodsman and cook. So I could potentially trim one of those. I could trim the woodsman out. Would the cook or somebody be able to replace the woodsman's knowledge? What do we really need them for? Hunting, collecting, or scavenging things to eat, leading the way through kind of the day-to-day slog. Yeah, they're probably pretty important. Do we bring in the cartographer as the start of our religion here? Because this would be somebody that is very focused on things that last, maps, getting things correct and true, creating something that people are going to use for ages and ages, and having kind of the ownership or the prestige of creating something like that that's so valuable. I think it'd be easy to have a cartographer that's very self-important and kind of aggrandizes their sense of self, illusions of grandeur. And then from there, there's maybe some room that they can start collecting a following for themselves. I don't know. I feel like I'm stretching a little bit, but also I think there is potential. So let's just take a look at what we've got here. I'm interested in the split of kind of hands-on versus mental roles that we've got. So knight, cook, woodsman, those are all just kind of probably more everyday folks. And captain, I guess, like the sailing captain. And then wizard, diplomat, cartographer. So those three are more mind-oriented. I am looking here. The captain seems pretty redundant once we get to the land. Captains obviously need to work from the stars a lot, so there's maybe some potential to make them the cartographer if they're already used to navigating and working with maps of a kind. But I do think having a separate captain from cartographer might create some plot opportunities down the line. When we get there, I could see the captain staying behind at the boat as the party begins to kind of venture out and explore from day to day. Is it realistic to combine the captain and cartographer? Probably not. I think I need the captain for some kind of a really gruff, practical person. Although I do have the woodsman. So how do I get the captain out? Because I need a way for these people to ride the ship and get there, but this feels like the captain doesn't do anything once I get there, unless if we build his character in a different way. But it feels like a stretch to give him the skills of a cartographer. I mean, could he? Maybe that's part of the arc for this character, is he is the most useful while they're sailing, and during the first couple of chapters while we're on the boat, it seems like the captain is the one in charge. And then as we get onto land and begin exploring what becomes the barony, there's this rising anger and feeling of uselessness from this captain as his skills are just not suited to land. I think that could be interesting. I mean, that's a lot to work with. And what I'm trying to do, like I said at the beginning, is just give myself a starting point with some interesting characters, not overplot this like I've done with the Jester's Son, and know exactly the turns of the story, what characters are involved, where they're going, what they're doing. I already know everything, so for the Jester's Son, it's more of the skill that's going to be there, or the learning that's going to be there, is translating an outline into a nice story. Whereas this is going to bring in kind of the coupling of imagining the story and reacting to what has just been there with writing a nice story, which sounds fun. It sounds fun to me to go a little bit more free flow and write what sounds fun and just share it and not overplot it. So plot, where do we start? I guess, do we want to outline these characters in more detail first? We've got 7 masters. If we're going to go with our earlier thought, then we would have 7 apprentices as well. That's 14 characters. That's a lot of characters to keep track of. Oh, man. Don't know if I love that. Definitely don't know if I love that. Oh, man. Okay, what would be the other version where we slim that down as much as possible? The knight seems like it needs to stay. What if we just combined cook, woodsman, captain? Is that crazy? Cook, woodsman, captain. And then we had a wizard and cartographer as the same person. And then we had the diplomat. So that's from 7 roles down to 4. That would be 8 total characters. That's manageable. Gosh, yeah, I feel like 14 is just, everybody's diluted so much. If you've got 14 characters in a scene, with 8, if you have a couple of them out doing some chores, some type of tasks, and you've got 3 or 4 in a scene, that's perfect. Okay, so can we get down to 4? The knight has to stay, like I said. I don't think that can gain any other skills, really. Cook, woodsman, captain. I could kind of see that. And we could still do kind of what we were planning with the captain of the master captain could be, an expert sailor, great marine man. He would be the leader the first few chapters, get them to the land, and then the apprentice could be more of the, raised as a cook, whatever, have a lot of background in cooking. That could be why this apprentice was chosen by this captain to sort of fill that role. And then the woodsman, we could sort of have a question mark there where nobody's really an excellent woodsman, and that could be part of the conflict. And then wizard cartographer, that kind of fits that the very mind, intelligence focused character is the one that's also drawing maps, recording things, most literate probably of the group. And then we have our diplomat as well. Just there for abrasion, causing trouble, walking into snake pits, all the things that diplomats are good for in stories. So I think that's good. And of course I'm writing none of this down, which is excellent. So I think what I want to do now is build out these characters. So we've got our 4 kind of roles. And something I'm interested in, I think, is doing this a little bit randomly. I heard something very interesting from Pierce Brown. I've been listening to a bunch of interviews of his lately, since I just did that little episode about Red Rising. I've been listening to some interviews of his, and spoiler for Red Rising if you haven't read it, but there's a scene in the first book, Red Rising, where one of the beloved characters is killed, and it's like brutal. This is somebody you thought was going to be there for the long haul, and they just get killed, and it seems kind of arbitrary that this person died. Well, that's true because the author Pierce Brown just randomly drew a name out of a hat. In it, the hat had every character's name in it except the viewpoint character, which is crazy to think about. Hearing that, because there's so many characters that are just necessary to the story that we got over the coming books, and you cannot imagine the story without them. And to think, any one of them could have actually been killed in book one is just wild. And the author did say, he had a lot of plans for this character that died, but his rule was he's going to draw a name out of the hat, and that character is going in the story. Is going out of the story. So that's kind of crazy. So what I'm kind of interested in doing here is taking some randomness, drawing some randomness into creating these characters, with one of Brandon Sanderson's idea, where there's a couple scales on each character for some different qualities, and if we get a random value, just off of the computer here or whatever, for each character, for each of these qualities, I think that might be all we need to have an interesting character set. So let's see, what qualities do we want to gauge here? We could have, and I'm just trying to remember some of the ones Brandon Sanderson uses, but relatability, skill, something like that is one of his. Relatability, likability is another one, which is not the same as relatability. I think it's close enough for me. A good writer like Sanderson can probably disassociate those, but for me, relatability is going to be... Actually, yeah, I can see the difference. Let's go likability as well. Okay, likability, relatability, skill, and I feel like there's one more I want to get in there. Maybe let's see, we could have like a suspicion meter, something like that. Suspicion isn't really the word I'm going for. It's more, I want characters with varying agendas, and to have some characters seem very clear that they are doing this to explore, doing it for the betterment of the country, whereas for others it is going to seem less, whatever. Backstory, maybe, is that what I'm going for? How much their backstory is influencing the story. I feel like I want a lot of them to have some pretty interesting backstory, but anyway, let's start with those four. Let's get some random values for those. So for the knight, likability. Let me get a little random number generator up here. Okay, so between 1 and 10, we're going to generate a number here for likability, relatability, skill, and backstory. So first is a 6, then a 10, then a 4, then a 6. Okay, so likability is a 6, relatability is a 10. Oh shoot, what was the next one? 4, 6? Is that what it was? So let me look at the old ones. I think it was oh boy. I'm already botching this. I better do it one at a time next time. Okay, so likability was a 6, relatability a 10, skill a 4, backstory 6. So I can see that skill as a 4 being something of an issue. So then that's the knight. Knight's apprentice. Likability, relatability, skill, backstory. Likability is 10. 10. All right. Apparently these fighter types are quite friendly. Likability is a 10. Relatability is a 6. Skill is an 8. Okay, beast. And backstory is a 1. Okay, what does that mean? Whoops, I just changed the knights as well. Okay, skill 8, backstory is a 1. Next is the cook. So cook's likability is a 2. Okay, yikes. That's going to be wild. Next is a 10 for relatability. Okay, that's an interesting combo. Likability of 2, relatability of 10. Skill is going to be a 3. Criminy. This is not the cream of the crop. And backstory is a 6. Okay. Cook's apprentice. So I'm seeing for the cook, there's definitely going to be some reasons that he's not very likable. And we as the reader are supposed to understand those because his relatability is so high. So probably a tough time of things for this cook. All right, cook's apprentice. This is who I kind of have in mind as the main character, although a large part of that is because I see this as a very relatable, likable character. So I guess we're going to see how these random values go. So first one for the cook's apprentice is likability, and it is a 2. Oh gosh. Not exactly what I had in mind. Relatability, let's generate, is a 9. Okay, so this is like the same as the actual cook, which is not very interesting so far. Next is a 1, criminy. Skill is a 1. And backstory is a 3. So the cook's apprentice has a likability of 2, relatability 9, skill 1, backstory 3. Definitely not what I had in mind. Okay. Don't know if I want a main character with stats that low in likability. I'll have to think about that. Maybe that's a challenge for me as the writer to learn to write a character like that. That's interesting. Okay, so next is the wizard. This is just riveting, isn't it? Generating numbers. Okay, 2. Why am I getting such low likabilities? Likability of 2 for the wizard. Nobody is going to be friendly in this. Relatability of 5. That kind of makes sense. It'd be hard to understand a wizard. Next is a 3 and then a 1. Oh boy. Skill is a 3. Backstory 1. Maybe this was a bad idea to do random values. Definitely wanted some higher skill in backstory for the wizard. What about the apprentice? Let's just do the rest of them and see what we end up with. Alright, 8 for the first one, which is likability. Relatability is 10. Criminy. Skill is 3. Nobody is very skilled in this expedition. That seems to be an issue. And backstory is 7. Okay, and lastly is the diplomat. Alright, the likability is 10. Oh my goodness. This is not what I had in mind. Relatability is a 4. Skill is a 9. Okay, beast. And backstory is a 4. Last but not least, the diplomatic apprentice. Likability is a 9. What is going on with this? Relatability, 8. Skill, 10. Jeepers. Backstory, 6. Okay, this is definitely not the spread I was looking for. So basically, our knights are okay. They're very, very likable, pretty skilled. Our cooks are not at all likable and not skilled. So they are just bad at everything. But at least you can understand why, because they have high relatability. The wizard is just bad at everything. The wizard's apprentice is very likable and very relatable, but not skilled. So our wizards are not good at wizardy things. The diplomats are amazing at everything. Super likable, super skilled for both of them. Weird. Okay. Well, I guess see what we get with that. Do I want to think about who's going to be the main character here? I definitely don't want to juggle perspectives. That seems pretty, I don't know, seems like a lot of work. I'd rather just stick with one. What I'm really trying to focus on to improve on as a writer is pantsing and being able to sort of improvise and react to what has been written and what is upcoming as new ideas come in. So that's really what I want to focus on, and rather than trying to juggle a bunch of viewpoints. So where do we want to be? A knight's apprentice is always interesting. That looks like a great character. Super skilled, very likable and relatable, surrounded by a bunch of kind of mean apprentices and other masters. That would be a good one. The cook's apprentice, that was the original choice, like I said. Likability of 2, relatability of 9. That could definitely work. We need some reasons that they're so frustrated, so angry, or rather so unlikable. That makes sense. That's why their relatability would be so high. The skill of 1 is really tough. How do we make a lot of things when they're so unskilled? Maybe that's just the starting point, and there's a lot of growth over the story. I could see something like this cook's apprentice was actually supposed to apprentice as somebody else, got stuck as a cook, and that's why they're so unskilled. I think that could work. Yeah. Okay, and that kind of leads me to an idea for the opening scene. If we have chapter 1, quote unquote, be the graduation ceremony, where, let's assume characters have been at some sort of school, they've competed, and now it's time to graduate. And they're graduating into a particular skill or role, one of these kind of 4 roles, let's say. Our character, probably a young man, he's definitely hoping to be, we could say, a knight. Let's see, I guess let's look at his qualities one more time. Highly unlikable, very relatable, no skill, minimal backstory. So I think it would make more sense that he would be trying to apprentice to a knight rather than a wizard. I think a wizard would have some amount of skill in cooking just from general knowledge of, chemistry and things like that. Whereas a knight, we could say he's a little bit thicker, a little bit more whatever. And that could create more friction between him and the knight's apprentice, who is very likable and very relatable, because we could create a lot of jealousy that our character feels towards this nice knight's apprentice, who's also super skilled. And we could, blend that a little bit further and say, at some point they had like a duel uh, as part of their graduation process. Maybe there's some sort of dueling tournament. And if this Knight's Apprentice beat our main character because he's so good and ours is not so good, then that creates more friction between those two characters to kind of explore as we're adventuring. So I think that's good. We're going to go with our unlikable, very relatable character, and maybe he's going to grow through this experience, hopefully. So anyway, back to chapter 1. I think our opening scene is this graduation ceremony, and somebody is reading off where these apprentices or students are being apprenticed to, and you're hearing a name, knight, whatever, a name, wizard, whatever, name, whatever, diplomat, whatever, and then our guy gets called, and it's to one of the cooks, who's obviously going to be seen as the lowest of those three tiers. The cook is just the person that makes the food. They do some of the kind of grunt work of gathering materials for the camp each night. Maybe they help sort of lead the way on these adventuring trips, like with some of their woodsman qualities. So they're definitely seen as the lowest, and therefore our character is not going to want to, be chosen by them. So I think that's a good starting point. And then from there we transition into getting on a boat, having some. Let's see. Hold on. Did we also roll the captain into our cook? Kind of feel like we did, didn't we? Yeah, cook, woodsman, captain. Okay. So evidently our cook is also going to have some of that marine skill. Boy, that feels like a stretch now that I'm really thinking about it. You know what we could do? This makes a lot of sense actually. Let's have some kind of sailing group that their role is really to just sail around and try to drop these adventurers off someplace. And then their goal is, okay, we found an island, we found a larger landmass. Let's drop these adventurers off. They're going to get things kind of settled in for us here at the start, maybe. And we're going to head back to the mainland. We're going to let people know, hey, there's a new area to explore here. And then we're going to lead the way and bring back, a ton of people to help explore this. That gets the captain out of our necessary characters, and it also gives us some flexibility in the plot later on, because we can have some sort of a ticking time bomb where the characters get dropped off at this new continent. They begin exploring, and maybe some of them want to wait until the rest of the party shows up. Maybe those are the orders. Just hold down a small area, establish some shelter, wait until wait 6 months or whatever until more people show up. And other people in the group can say, we need to explore this. Like, this is our chance. If we find something great, we could really strike it rich. I'm not waiting for other people to show up here and kind of steal what could be ours. So I think we could get a lot of friction there, and then that also gives us a doorway to bring more characters from the mainland into the story. If we know, or if we've planted the seed with the reader that in 200 pages there's going to be people show up here, then when we bring them on later in the book, it's realistic and believable. So I think that's good. I don't want to overplot this. Like I said, we've got kind of a little cast of characters here. I will probably go through, name them, give them some traits, and sort of try to make a few connections between these totally random, qualities that we determined. This is probably not a good way to do it at all, but like I've said a couple times, my goal is less of practicing my outlining skills. In other words, manufacturing these characters to fill certain purposes in the plot. My goal is more. Here's the starting picture. Practice writing. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Gonna flesh this out just a bit more so I've got some more ground to stand on, and then my goal, I think, is let's just start writing a chapter. It sounds really fun. I want to get this graduation chapter kind of laid out, and then from there we'll start sailing and arrive at the barony. So thanks for sailing through this episode with me. It was a very different, fun one for me to do, and I'm excited to see what comes out of it. So I will be sharing that as well in a future episode whenever I'm done with it. So thanks for listening, and hope you enjoyed.